Good morning and welcome. Today we're lucky to have Dr. Steven Were Omamo in our show. Dr. Omamo is the former WFP, to mean World Food Program Country Director for Ethiopia, and he was part of the team that won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2020, together with his team and the WFP worldwide. Again, Dr. Omamo is the author of a new book called At the Center of the World in Ethiopia, a book about his experience while he was the country director for WFP in Ethiopia. Dr. Omamo, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
Nice to meet you too. Many congratulations for winning the Nobel Prize, you together with the WFP. How do you feel about that win?
When we were awarded the Nobel Prize, we were really thrilled, surprised, deeply honored, and really humbled. It came as a deep surprise because WFP is very much a quiet organization. It's a large organization, but quiet, working in the background. And so when we were recognized in that way, it was really very thrilling and exciting.
Yeah. Probably, why do you think you were awarded, why do you think WFP was awarded that honor? That's a big honor, you know.
At the time, the Nobel Committee said that it was because of WFP's efforts to address food insecurity in conditions of conflict. And that this was a major implication, a major impact, and making that link between peace and food security. And this is work that WFP had been doing for many years. So it was really a recognition not just of work in 2020, but for 50 years of effort to meet the needs of the hungry, also address the root causes of hunger.
Okay, I see. And now a brief summary of your book. You have written a very interesting book, which is titled At the Center of the World in Ethiopia. That's a very interesting title for a book. Could you tell us briefly what the books are about and why you chose to give it that title? Why At the Center of the World in Ethiopia? Yeah,
the book is in many ways a memoir of the work that I did during the period 2018 to 2021, when I was serving as head of the WFP program in Ethiopia. This is a period of quite significant change in Ethiopia. You may recall that in 2018, this is the year that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed assumed power. Yeah. And then with that came a quite extraordinary set of transitions and transformation of the country, social, political, economic. And so there was a very exciting period, if you like. It was also a period that witnessed significant upheaval, significant disruption. Yeah. Some of it due to long-standing disruptions linked to climate in particular, droughts, floods, storms, because Ethiopia is such a vast country. Yeah. At any given time, there's somewhere getting too much rain, somewhere getting too little rain. Yeah. So we were part of the response to those crises. But at the same time, there were a set of new issues that had to be addressed that were linked to the transformation. So an IDP, internally displaced people, very large numbers across borders within the country due to ethnic strife, which was erupting, if you like, as a result of new openings in the country. Yeah. But also there was COVID. Yeah, sure. There was desert locust infestation. Yeah. And then finally there was a civil war in the north. So WFP was all part of that. And I, as the leader, had to address a number of issues that I found quite interesting. And I thought of them as revolving around certain tensions between the government and the international community. Yeah. Tensions between science-based thinking on science-based action and political action, tensions between what I call the cowboy mentality and the bureaucratic mentality. There was racism and friendship tensions there. Yeah. And then handouts and investments, so a certain tension there. Yeah. And finally, a tension in perspective between a crisis mindset and a crisis narrative on one hand, and a transformation narrative on the other. I found it was really quite interesting, and these tensions, as I described them, I think you can relate to them. They are quite global in expression, or global in relevance, and they had some very acute expressions in
Absolutely,
Ethiopia.
Yeah, I read the book, and the book is very interesting. Yeah. I'd like to know, when did you become the country director or the country director for WFP in Ethiopia?
This was July 2018.
2018?
Yes.
So did you go in when there was the transition or just before Abiy Ahmed became the prime minister?
Right after. So he became prime minister in April. Yes.
Yeah. So it's very right to say that you were there while Ethiopia was going through all these crises from the genesis, right? So From your perspective, what do you think was the cause of the Tigray War, or the war in northern Ethiopia?
You know, as a WFP country director and as an organization, we were dealing largely with the consequences of the crisis, of the war, and less to do with the causes.
Yeah.
And the consequences were quite profound for us because the conflict really impacted on our ability to operate and ability to deliver support to populations that were impacted. And this really had to do with the difficulties on certain humanitarian routes.
Yeah.
So we were seeing the consequences of the conflict for the most part. But I think that said, I think everybody would understand that the conflict had its roots in that transformation, in the transfer of power, or the shift in the power relations in the country, and and also a difference in perspective regarding the future of the country.
Yeah.
And so those were the root causes of it.
Yeah. And in the book still, you talk about some routes which were blocked from Addis to Tigray. Who do you think was responsible for that blockage or blockade?
Yeah. You know, for the most part, what we were seeing was fighting along those routes.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, I think in a war situation, having control of certain arteries into and out of a conflict zone, it is important. You know, these are contested assets, if you like, in a war, and therefore they would shift hands at different times, and most of the time that we were unable to deliver support into Tigray, and not just Tigray, but also parts of Amhara, which were also affected, and also parts of the neighboring Afar. It had to do with fighting along these routes.
Yeah. Did you lose any of the WFP staff during the war in the northern Ethiopia?
Not as a direct result of the war, but what we did unfortunately lose is a colleague who died within Tigray. He had a treatable ailment, but we could not get him out in time because there was no flights into and out of Tigray. And so by the time we got him to a place where he could be treated, it was too late. Yeah,
sorry for that. Let's go back a bit. From the onset of the book, you use international community in further quotes. To me, it was coming off as sort of sarcastic. I mean, why do you refer to international community in such a manner?
It wasn't supposed to be sarcastic. It was more, I was trying to get across this paradox or contradiction in the term. So less about, not so much sarcastic, but more the contradiction. Because the term really, it has certain challenges in it. On one hand, there definitely is an international community. There are global platforms, global organizations in which countries come together to think about and address current and future challenges and opportunities. But at the same time, these organizations and this community, there's an imbalance of power within it. There are certain quite influential members of the international community, and such that imbalance of power works against the idea of a community as such. And so that's the idea that I was getting across. And in the book, I address this idea that the international community is supposed to be a neutral and impartial entity. But in the case of Ethiopia, it wasn't always the case. There were certain very important voices in the international community that were not always unbiased, were not always neutral, and this was not always helpful at an operational level for us.
How, for example, did that bias or lack of being neutral from the international community in WFP hamper or affect the operations of WFP in Ethiopia?
I think there were times when it would have been very beneficial for us to have a balanced narrative so as to promote our ability to operate. Because when there are statements made by influential figures that are not, that confuse, if you like, certain stakeholders, or that turn the government against one party, against the international community, then of course we all suffer. And so that was the challenge. I think there was a very clear impression within the government that the international community was not fully neutral and impartial. And in the book, I describe some of these instances where I agreed with that. There were some statements that were made by certain influential people that were clearly not balanced.
Yeah.
And this did not help.
Still on that, there is a place where you said that your regional boss or the regional director of WFP felt that you were too close to the government of Ethiopia, and to him, okay, to them that was not very good of you. And again, at some point, a representative from Tigray region also kind of blamed you for being a robot or for being a representative of the Prime Minister, that's Abiy Ahmed. Why do you think they made such statements or such comments to you? And was that true, by the way?
No, it was not true.
Yeah.
The comment from the regional director,
yeah,
I think it was born out of, at the time, an incomplete understanding or appreciation of the way in which we were operating in Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, you can only operate in a humanitarian context at the request of the government. Now, at the time, there were big concerns that the situation in Tigray was deteriorating, and there was big pressure to act. Everybody could feel this. But at the time, there was not a request from the government.
Yeah.
So I was trying to, at the time, explain that we could not proceed unless we had this request.
Yeah.
And it was not completely fully appreciated.
Yeah.
And I think this was what underpinned some of that. In time, they came to understand, but for a long time, that impression was there.
Yeah.
And even at one point, I was accused of being biased toward the government, again, because of lack of understanding of this. But I think we overcame that.
Yeah.
In terms of the comment from the TPLF's humanitarian head, that came from the fact that our narrative about our operation in Tigray was somewhat different from theirs, I would say. Now, what we were saying at the time, and the issue that really was most challenging to this leader, was that we had trucks that we were contracting, and they were not coming out of Tigray. They were going into Tigray to drop off our supplies and not coming out.
Yeah.
As a result, the number of trucks that were available to move food into the region was falling.
Yeah.
So at one point we didn't have any trucks. We didn't have our own fleet, it was very small. We didn't have enough trucks to move. And so this was a point we were making. They were saying that this situation was linked to the fact that there was no fuel in the region. And the fact we were saying actually there was fuel in the region. And so that could not be the reason for the trucks not coming out. And so there were some differences in narrative that was driving that particular perspective from the leader.
Yeah. And do you feel that the TPLF were sort of sabotaging the operation of WFP too?
Not at all. They weren't sabotaging, but...
There is a place where you say that they were looting from the warehouses.
Okay,
yeah.
That's a different issue. So there was a time when the TPLF's military wing, the TF, took control of a certain city called Kombolcha, in which we had a large warehouse. And we got reports, and we confirmed that these soldiers had taken food from the warehouse. And so we reported this, and it was in the international news. Yeah. They of course denied it, but it was known that this had happened. Yeah. Now that I wouldn't call it sabotage. They were doing illegal things for their own benefit. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We also had looting by communities along the route between Semera and Mekelle. Yeah. These convoys that were moving from Semera to Mekelle. Yeah. Some of the communities along the way, seeing this food moving through their regions, and they were hungry as well, they looted. So looting was something which was there, and we reported it, and we took steps to try and avert it. But the case that you're describing was definitely there. Okay. On the earlier comment from the regional boss or the regional director of WFP, I'd like to know, is there anything wrong at all to be close to the government? Because again, you said that you can't operate in Ethiopia without the support of the government. Yeah. So is there anything wrong on a WFP director to be close to the government? No, it's expected. It's part of your job. Yeah. You have to be close to the government. The implication in this particular statement was that I was too close, and therefore I was not objective, I was not unbiased. That was the implication in that. And that was offensive and quite an insult at the time. But no, we were expected, they are expected to be close. You're a representative, that's your title, representative and country director.
Yeah.
So that's your job, to represent your organization to the government.
Yeah.
And if you are not close to the government, then you can't operate. It's the same here in this country. It's the same anywhere in which there is a functioning government. You really have got you've got to have a good relationship just for the benefit of your organization, but more so for the benefit of the people that you are there to support.
I see. What can you say about the food security report? There was that study that was done, I think, around 2019 or 2020, thereabout. And clearly you are not satisfied with the findings, not with the findings, but on the report that you said was leaked. Why do you think first it was leaked, and why were you not satisfied with the report?
I don't know why it was leaked. I don't know who leaked it. But the point is that the analysis that was informing that report had not been completed. There were certain issues, in fact, certain contentious issues between the government and other partners that were still being resolved. There was progress in them, but they hadn't been resolved. But somehow the report came out, and because of that, it undermined, first of all, the credibility of the report from the viewpoint of the government. But also, what happened is that the findings of the report were misrepresented. So one finding was that there was no famine of Tigray, clearly. Second was that there was a risk of near famine for a certain number of people, about 350 to 400,000 people. So then the report also said that these findings were in some ways they were indicative. They weren't definitive because certain information had not been available. But what happened is that immediately upon its leaking, there were statements that, number one, there was famine. Some individuals said there was famine, which is in total contravention.
Including WFP, right?
No, hold on. I'm coming to WFP.
Okay.
And second, that these near famine situation was already in place, whereas in fact it was a risk of near famine. So it was, very unnuanced presentation, and immediately began to be propagated internationally, which was unfortunate because what we lost was quite significant. First, this report is supposed to be a basis to build consensus on where the hungry people are, how many they are, and what needs to be done to address them. So that was lost. And second, the trust in the government that had been built up, the government's trusting us
over time,
that was also lost. Now, unfortunately, WFP also began to quote the report in ways that were not necessarily in that sort of unnuanced way. And in the book, I give an example in which there is a claim that people were dying of hunger in Tigray region, but not based on any facts. So again, this is unfortunate, but it was part of the politicization of that report and not helpful.
Why do you think the WFP, as the world body, was sucked into this conflict? I mean, when I say conflict, I mean you as the country director, you as the then country director for Ethiopia, for WFP, you say that the report was misrepresentative, right? I mean, the analysis was not right, and the WFP sort of endorsed the report. Why do you think there was this?
The team that I was leading was part of the effort to develop the report. But we understood its limitations and the way in which it really should have been used. But I think, as part of the effort to raise funding for that important operation, there needed to be an argument around the number of people who were being affected. And I think that was the motivation behind the way in which it was used internally. So intention probably good, but actually the result now is that process, as I say in the book, I believe is dead and buried, and it will be very difficult to resurrect it because of the loss of trust.
Let's talk about racism. In the book, you talk heavily or widely about racism. especially when you refer to the Africans or the blacks who work in the WFP in Ethiopia versus the international staff. When I say international, I mean the Europeans and the people from North America. Why do you feel that there was a lot of racism in WFP, especially in Ethiopia?
A few things. First, there was a survey done, a survey of WFP staff, and one of the questions, or some of the questions, dealt with racism. And from that survey, it was clear that over 1,500 people indicated that they had directly been affected by racism. They had experienced racism. Over 2,300 said that they had witnessed racism. So it's not an opinion, it's a fact. This is reported by WFP staff. So that's global. Within my team, we worked very hard to ensure that the racism did not enter into decision making. But there's a subculture. We were like any country office that was affected by racism because it was so widespread in the organization. And when there were, as leader, when there were instances, I dealt with them quite directly, and I give an example in the book. Now, the issue of staffing is a bit different. The point in the book is not necessarily about Ethiopia.
Yeah.
It's about the way in which the authority and the accountability that we had when we were dealing with international staff, which was very empowering, and that when we were dealing with appointing senior African staff, local, national staff, it turned out that this was very scrutinized very carefully and with a lot of information, a lot of justification. Now, the reason being that these senior nationals, they would be doing the kind of job that internationals would, right? And so there was a scrutiny there. That's the point I make there, that there's some processes that are embedded within the institution that are fundamentally racist. That's the point.
Okay. And why do you think there is that sort of mistrust or distrust? Because the fact that you say that African nationals were being so much scrutinized, unlike the others, unlike the whites, it implies that I think Africans are not trusted so much to work in those senior positions, right? I
think it has to do with the vision of who should have these positions, right? Positions of that sort. Now, again, I'm not the only one who went through this. I know other country directors who had similar challenges. Yeah. And I would say it has to do with what the somehow has become the norm for who occupies those positions. And so even though a country director like myself would say, actually, I want this position filled in a particular way, there would still be questions. And even went as far as to say, but we like to have these positions kept for internationals, and not necessarily whites, right? But internationals, So, and of course, within that international cadre, people from North America and Europe are overrepresented compared to the number in the organization. So you can see the way in which that plays out ultimately. So I think that's the way in which I felt, again, from my own experience, I felt in which the race issue was expressing itself in these hiring and processes. You
yourself, were you affected directly by racism?
Sure, yeah, definitely. Through day-to-day interactions, the way in which some of these things, some of the challenges that I think I went through, surely, of course, I don't have definitive evidence of that. These are hard to point to, but
But a few examples perhaps could.
No, sure, I go through them in the book, where during normal interactions, people make racist, maybe inadvertently, but make racist comments or dismiss a comment. So I think this is there are different types of racism that one can endure. So there's the direct interpersonal ones, which I'm sure we all have examples. And then there are those that are embedded within the institutions. And I give examples of them in the book. Right?
There was this point where, I can't be so sure, but there is a senior WFP staff who came to Ethiopia, and they wanted to go to northern Ethiopia. I think there was food distribution in that area, and they were not even trying. they truly pull rank on you. How do you take that? I mean, how do you feel?
This was actually the story in the book is of a UN regional director and a country director. So not necessarily not necessarily a WFP thing. It was the account is from a regional director from an agency that had operations there. And this is an example in the book of a certain kind of behavior among what I call self-serving, glory-seeking cowboys. So in that part of the book, I contrast that kind of behavior from mission-driven cowboy behavior. Now, what do I mean by cowboy behavior? You know, these situations are always very complex in the field, and you cannot follow the rules all the time if you want to make progress. You have to be pushing the boundary just to solve problems. And you do this in the right way. When you have an objective that you're trying to solve, an operational objective backed by some understanding of the political situation. In the book, I indicate, you know, where this is relevant and how it was so important in our operation. But at the other extreme, there are people who push the boundary not for some operational objective, but rather to serve some more personal objective. And the example that I give is of this regional director who wants to go and witness a humanitarian operation, and along the way is advised that the security situation is not good, but insists and is actually breaking many rules to do this, putting himself in danger, putting others in danger, and overruling, pulling rank on the representative in the country. And ultimately, he fails, but it's only because some security officers do their job. But you know, this was all because this individual wanted to be there for a distribution to say that he had been there. And he said it, you know, I want to go, apparently. He said it, he told the person, I want to be there for reasons of, you know, so that I'm there.
Well, but was this an isolated case, or such cases of senior UN officials using their positions to sort of glory themselves or take advantage? Were there many?
No, I can't say. This is the only example. The example that in the book is of this kind of behavior. So I can't say if others did that, no.
Well. And why did you resign from the anti-racism task force, where you are, I think, vice chair, right?
Yes, I was co-chair. It was a waste of my time.
Waste of time?
It was a waste of my time because that survey that I mentioned before, in which this quite devastating result came out of thousands of people who had witnessed racism, not a word was said about it. Not one word, not a comment from the executive director or anybody. And it was very clear to me that this was not something that was going to, this task force was not something that was going to yield anything. If that kind of devastating result yields zero response, you know, why waste time? And I was just so disgusted by the whole thing. I was very busy as country director in Ethiopia. My plate was full. I was dealing with racism in my own particular context. That was sufficient. If the organization wasn't going to face this terrible result, that's why. It was a waste of time.
Do you know how the final result of the task force that was formed?
I had left. I don't know.
So you left while still it was working?
Well, I never heard anything further about it after I resigned. So I wasn't part of it anymore. It may have continued its work, but there was no evidence that I was seeing. But I'm sure the people involved have continued to try. I know that the other co-chair left the organization at some point in 2021. So.
I'm interested to know, did you also resign from being the country director for WFP in Ethiopia, or it was your term that elapsed?
No, I left the organization.
You left?
Yes, I left. I resigned from the organization.
Why?
I wanted to do other things. I wanted to return to New Growth International. I told my team at the time I had some writing projects I wanted to do, and as you can see, I've done this and many other writing projects that I've completed since then. And so that's why.
Yeah, but being a country director for World Food Program is a big deal. Yeah? One will wonder, as I am still wondering, I mean, why will one resign from such a big position where you have the power to influence, of course, for good and also even for bad if you can, you know. Yeah.
There are many things to do in the world.
Yeah.
I think I did that job very well.
Yeah.
I did it for 3.5 years, and I think I succeeded with my team. And I wanted to do something else, and I am doing that.
Okay.
You know, I love the organization. There was nobody pushing me out, nothing like that.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic organization, and I admire immensely. But I was ready to do something else.
Okay. Wow, interesting. And still on racism, just a little bit. Do you think that the racism that was explicit and implicit at some point, did it in any way affect your staff? I mean, its operation in terms of, let's say, morale and otherwise?
It turns out that like other offices, there was racism. Colleagues actually did identify this in the survey. Yeah. But you know, I was very aware of this as an issue from my own personal experience, but also because of my role in that task force. So I give examples of how I dealt with it. I was very aware and tried to make sure that it didn't influence, you know, that subculture.
Yeah.
Didn't influence the overall culture.
Yeah.
And you know, I guess I knew how to address it because I was so aware of it. This isn't to say that it wasn't there. The fact that there was no recognition of the issue at corporate level probably was a lost opportunity for us to act on it at country level. And hopefully that will happen because I know it's still an issue.
Okay.
But at my level, I took, you know, quite concrete steps to try to address it. And again, in the book I described it.
Okay. Did any of your steps achieve success?
In the sense that it was averted a situation in which an outcome would have affected morale, an outcome would have affected cohesion. And in the book I can describe the situation, the example I give in the book, in which a very good manager, one of the good managers in the team, for whatever reason was wanted a position created for a European woman in a new unit where she did not have qualifications yet, and actually there was no demand for her. So it would have meant creating something specially for this individual. And so there would have been two very unfortunate outcomes. In the unit where she was working, they would have lost capacity. And in the unit where she was destined to go, there would have been some confusion and a loss of, you know, an effect. Their morale, I think, and cohesion would have been affected. So this was avoided, and so that's the sort of thing that I tried to do.
I see. Well, towards the end, you seem to be against handouts, and you advocate for investment-oriented help. Is that right?
I'm not necessarily against handouts, but what I describe in the book, and it really comes from my professional background as an agricultural economist and economist, and where I've spent a lot of time studying agricultural development and food security and rural development. And there you realize that there's so many structural impediments to people being self-reliant. Now, when there is a shock, when there is some disruption, and you know, people cannot deal with the situation, you have to support. And this is when a handout is a very appropriate thing to do. But what we see is that it's very difficult to stop these handouts once they start, because people, you know, they become dependent on them, and there's no doubt about that. And in Somali region, the example that I use in the book, there are millions of people who have been receiving handouts for decades, and there seems to be no way for them to get off it. But rather, the point is, can we identify what the structural issues are? And in Somali region, they have to do with access to water, access to markets, and peace and cohesion overall. So if those things can be addressed, and in Somali region, the peace came, and now there are some very concrete efforts to address the water and markets. Then people can they can be on a different trajectory of towards self-reliance. Now the challenge is that there's a bit of a growing fad around cash transfers in particular as a solution to everything. And it turns out, I mean, I am against that I don't think what they do, again, they breed dependence, and unless there is something that is addressing the structural problem that is creating the vulnerability, they will go on forever. And they'll be very difficult to remove.
But again, do you think that at any time the handouts will be a thing of the past in Africa?
No, I think it's difficult. I mean, I doubt it. I think there are crises all the time.
Yeah.
And, people are vulnerable and they need support. So I think that likely will continue. I think what is important is that these structural drivers of vulnerability are addressed in a consistent and sustained way. Smallholder farmers in many places have never had a chance. They've never really had a chance. They don't have the roads, they don't have the electricity, they don't have many of the things that are associated, we know, with successful agriculture. So if we address those structural challenges, then we have a good chance. But identifying vulnerable groups and giving them handouts without the other things in place is not the answer. This is my strong belief.
Okay. In conclusion, besides the winning or the honor of being bestowed with the Nobel Peace Prize of 2020, what other good memories do you carry from Ethiopia?
There's so many. I had a truly fantastic team. I called them in the book mission-driven cowboys. They really were, but also very principled, collegial colleagues. I really feel lucky to have had them. As we've said, I had a great relationship with the government, and I think we were a very good partner to the government across the country. WFP had operations in every single one of the regions, and as I say in the book, we were viewed as an organization that could be trusted.
Okay.
So I think those are some fantastic memories, along with some more day-to-day things that really make life and work enjoyable.
Okay. Many thanks for having you in the show. I really appreciate for your time.
My thanks to you, Steve.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.